Hello friends, Mr. E here. So, a few days ago, I put a video out talking about expeditions, and in that video, I sort of asked the question of like, okay, so why do we keep getting these random game modes that nobody asked for? Why are the updates sort of a grab bag of, wait, like, why was the dev time put to this rather than something much more core, rather than what the community has been constantly asking for? And I realized that I know the answer, right? I know the answer in large part, but I didn't share it in that video, and I saw a lot of you asking in the questions, so I figured I'd make this video here today. It is a little bit more complicated than you might think, but you know, the ultimate question is, why do we get new random game modes? Why are they 100% all in on new classes, but they won't commit to making new weapons or new maps for like the old classes, right? Why can't we get new cosmetics for the DLC classes, etc. like that? And this has everything to do with not Fat Shark necessarily, but their business partners, or rather their business overlords, because they are very much in a gilded cage here. They have a ton of access to revenue, to funds from their corporate partners, and they have a great IP on their hands, but that comes with a price. So we'll be exploring that today. Now, before I begin, I have a couple things to say. The first is that, you know, I love making these videos about the inner workings of Fat Shark. I know you guys love them. You know who doesn't love them? Fat Shark. So if you want to support me on the off chance that they get mad, then you can become a channel member and really help me to grow the channel and keep the lights on here. Thanks for your support. Okay, let's go to the first thing that I actually wanted to talk about here, which was Darktide's Dark Secret. Now, this is a video made by Yobi Rayon? Yeah, Yobi Bear. Okay, yeah, that guy down there. I can't say that, but he made this video. Very good video. Talks a lot about the development process and timelines for it. And yeah, it really does kind of hammer on what I'm going to be talking about here today. So I'll be restating some parts of his thesis. I think that a lot of this is very much true, but more or less cracking down to why Darktide feels like a ghost town sometimes. Why it doesn't really feel like it is seeing a whole lot of the development that, you know, if you or I were in control, we would go like all in on Darktide, right? Because it's such a good game, but they don't seem to want to do that, and why. But I'll also be tackling that here today, so go check his video out. Okay, so let's crack into things, starting with the most important relation, the most important thing of all, which is going to be the foundational sort of thing you need to know to start the conversation today. So first of all, Fat Shark is owned. They are owned by Tencent. That Tencent has a majority stake in Fat Shark, and they have since about 2021. And that means that Tencent basically gets to hold the purse strings and tug Fat Shark around to do what they want, right? They gave them a bunch of money in order to acquire that stake, with the expectation that Fat Shark would produce at a higher level with that money. So if you ever watched Shark Tank, that's pretty fitting, isn't it? But if you ever watch Shark Tank, you know, the sharks will have some guy up there he needs money to get his company off the ground. He's got a product. He's showing that, hey, it's done pretty well here. And they say, all right, we'll give you this much lump sum of money, but you need to produce this, and we want this much of a stake in your company, right? And the real functional thing here is that if a company takes a majority stake in your company, they get to decide, right? Because, you know, they now have control of the voting, you know, more than 50% of the votes, so they can vote in the direction the company will take. So Tencent having majority stakeholder in Fat Shark means that more or less they get to make the decisions. Now, Tencent is so freaking massive that Fat Shark is a tiny little like grain of sand to them, so they probably let them stay on their own devices for a lot of stuff. But in terms of the large scale decisions, what are you working on right now? That is very much going to be on Tencent, because they are very interested in, you know, producing new stuff that makes them money on the back end. Then we also have to consider Games Workshop, who are the IP holder. They are the Warhammer people, right? So if you want to make a game in the Warhammer universe, you must kowtow to Games Workshop, and that can take a couple of different relationships. I would imagine that there's a monetary agreement here where they pay maybe a percentage royalty fee of all their earnings to Games Workshop, or maybe there was a flat fee up front. Either way, because you were using their IP, Games Workshop gets to look over every single thing you do and make certain that it is following the designs correctly. And if you don't, they can hit you with sanctions. They can strip your license away. They can do all sorts of stuff, right? It can be pretty brutal if you run afoul of your IP holder. So you gotta play ball. And that can be pretty hard to do when you're trying to get creative and you got Games Workshop against you, because they are notoriously pretty picky. Now, one thing that people aren't always clear on is Tencent the publisher for Darktide? And they are not. Fatshark is self-published, and they always have been. So Fatshark is a dev and a publisher. They don't use Tencent to publish for them, so that's good, and that gives them more creative control. But it doesn't mean that they are completely exempt from that creative control. And this all has produced the game we all know and love, Darktide. Okay, so what's this all going to come down to? It's making money, right? All three of these companies, they are companies. They're trying to make money. And in order to make that money, they have different goals they must accomplish, because they all have, so they're going to be at odds with each other in some way, shape, or form. And hopefully they can work together to make this money together on Darktide. Let's see how they do it. So first of all, Fatshark, how do they make money? Well, number one, selling games. You might think that, oh, the microtransactions must have outweighed the game sales at this point. No fucking way. Darktide overall, just on Steam alone, has sold probably around $100 million in gross revenue. So that's not net, but like still $100 million, and that's on Steam. So think about Game Pass, think about, PS5, Xbox, whatever else. Like those revenues are massive. And that is by far the lump sum of the money that they make. So then secondarily, we have cosmetics. So they do, of course, earn some revenue, probably enough to keep the lights on, from the Aquilas and the cosmetic shop and stuff in Vermintide 2 as well, and DLC with the character classes, with the Arbites, with the Hive Scum, right? But those are very reasonably priced. I tend to think that those are designed to fund the continuing development of the game, right? And probably not like to make them super like rich. Like they're pretty modestly priced for that, but they still do generate a lot of revenue because they do sell quite a bit. So that's how Fatshark makes their money. Let's look at how Games Workshop makes its money. That is first and foremost, and back in 15 years ago or so ago, it was primarily selling tabletop stuff. That's rule books, that's miniatures, that's paints. Like anything Warhammer branded, that's all them, right? All the official Warhammer stuff. I think that is still the vast majority of how they make their money, but they also make their money by licensing their IP. And this has grown and grown and grown, because more so now maybe than ever, the Warhammer brand is not so much controlled by like Games Workshop themselves. It used to be back in an era we'll talk about in a minute, but there was an era maybe about a decade ago where Games Workshop developed all their own stuff, and now there's tons of licensed creators out there who are creating stuff for Games Workshop, and they are probably giving back profits in some way, shape, or form. Like I said before, it could be a one-time payment up front. Hey, you want the license to put 40K in your game? That'll be $40K or something, or it'll be a percentage of all revenue, like a royalty payment, whatever it is. Yeah, they're making money off of that stuff, and that is an expanding portion of their business because, yeah, Warhammer is getting pretty big, right? So then we have Tencent, and Tencent, this is a small portion of how they make their money. If you're familiar with Tencent, they are a absolute megacorp. Like they are like a cyberpunk-esque megacorp. They are a telecommunications company. They own digital banking things in China. They have tons and tons of different revenue streams, but the vast majority of the way that they do make their money, even with all those streams considered, is microtransactions. They call it value-added gaming or something like that. That's an unfortunate acronym. But yeah, the value-added microtransactions, that stuff makes them a ton of their money, and that's because they have these microtransactions stores in pretty much every game under their umbrella. So League of Legends has them, Warframe has it, right? A percentage of the revenue that those stores earn is going to be given to Tencent. And Tencent also, of course, has their bean counters who decide exactly what the optimal layout for the store is, what's going to manipulate people the best to purchase more. And yeah, that is why a lot of these Tencent games, when you look at like mobile games and stuff under their umbrella, they look very similar because it's like a template. And that's why, Darktide has always had this microtransaction store that was perfect and like worked flawlessly. When there were so many other bugs in the game, it was like functioning on day one because it was probably drag and dropped into the game, and it was a mandate from Tencent to have that in there. And then publishing games. So this is not important for our discussion about Fat Shark today because Fat Shark self-publishes, but if you were a smaller studio or you just don't have those connections, then Tencent will publish. Like Tencent are publishers and they have those connections. So this can make it very, very easy for you if you are a smaller company and you don't have the assets, you don't have, sort of the whatever it is that you need to get to market, to actually physically get on shelves and get into the Steam markets and stuff like that. Tencent can make that happen. But if you do let Tencent publish for you, of course, it's going to come at an additional cost. It's going to come at a monetary cost for you. They're probably going to, you need a larger kickback on all of your earned revenues, but also it's going to come at a cost of control, because if they're your publisher, then they get even more, sort of fingers in the pie in terms of deciding which way you go with the game. And then finally, investing in smaller companies. And the way they earn money off of this, of course, is they can take a percentage of their earnings if they really want to. But in the case of a company like Fat Shark is so small as compared to Tencent, it's much more likely that Tencent takes a very, a modest cut of the microtransaction revenue, and then they just kind of let them keep most of the rest of their revenue, right? Because you don't want to hurt the business. You don't want to strip away their money so they can't develop their games. You want to make your asset grow. So I think probably in Fat Shark's case, they invested in them not to get a direct return on investment like all the time, but to be there when those big like windfalls happen. So they'll take a cut of the gross product sales when like, the new games drop and stuff like that. But outside of that, they're probably pretty hands-off. They want Fat Shark to have the budget to continue developing, and they're also holding Fat Shark as part of their portfolio, right? It looks good when you're a company who's trying to acquire other companies and grow your brand and get more stuff under your umbrella, to be able to point at a company like Fat Shark and like, hey, look at their games. They had Vermintide 2 that was this big, and then they had Darktide that's this big, and then they had, the next project that's even this big. And so that can be sort of a feather in their cap that they have done this with Fat Shark by with their divine leadership. Okay, so now we have all our players established. Let's go over the timeline, and this will give us some context to take us to where we are today, and hopefully start to color in exactly why and how Darktide and Fat Shark make their decisions. So the Tide timeline starts back in 2013. This is when Fat Shark acquired that Warhammer license, and this is back in the 2012 to 2017-ish era, where Games Workshop was like at all costs just trying to broaden the reach, to broaden the visibility of the IP of Warhammer, right? So they were literally just giving this out to any Joe Schmo, more or less, and that was great. It produced a lot of cool Warhammer games at the time. Double edge on that sword, however, is that it also produced a lot of slop, a lot of trash, and stuff that really probably didn't look good on the Warhammer brand. And, that is probably led to the current era of Games Workshop, where they are kind of known for being sticklers with their IP, because they don't want to end up in a situation like that again, where you got a billion people running around making your IP look like garbage. So they gave this license to Fat Shark as a smaller studio who might not have gotten it in the current era, right? And then they have produced the Warhammer Vermintide 1 game, and that was, pretty pretty good. 300,000 copies sold in the first month, 2 million copies sold by the first of 2018. That's a very, very good success for a really small studio. And you have to remember that Fat Shark, prior to 2013 era, they had produced like 2 games on the Xbox 360, and they were very small. They mostly just kind of worked like contract work for other companies. They weren't like, they kind of like split off of some other company at some point, but like, yeah, they just weren't known. They weren't known players. So to have a big success like this for a very unknown company, that draws eyes. And then in 2016 or so, development on Vermintide 2 likely began. We can tell this because there's a lot of interviews and sort of information out there about like, when the concept art and stuff started flowing. So they very quickly had this big windfall. They made a bunch of money, and they probably said, you know what? Like, we gotta make the game we actually wanted to make now that we have the revenue to make it. Let's start on Vermintide 2. So they buckled down and they started on Vermintide 2, and this released in 2018 and sold 1 million copies in the first month, sold 2 million copies total by the first of 2020. So a pretty big uptick, right, from Vermintide, and we sold that 2 million copies in much less time. So yeah, Vermintide 2, huge success. Huge success, much bigger than the first one, and it really shows. Like, that game is so much better than the first game. As good as Vermintide 1 is, Vermintide 2 is a refinement, it's an expansion, it's a great game. And then Tencent has now acquired 36% stake in Fat Shark as of 2019. So unclear whether or not they owned any stake in them prior to this, but we have to imagine that for Tencent's purposes, you couldn't ask for a better, like, acquisition than Fat Shark. This is a company that develops and publishes their own games, so you don't have to fuss with that. And they don't have any existing like parent company or ownership, so they're just kind of like out there waiting for a bidder. And here comes Tencent with a lot of money, $56 million to be precise, and that acquires 36% stake in Fat Shark. So this is what I'm imagining this sort of deal is, just like when we talked about earlier with like Shark Tank. When you get given $56 million, that has some strings attached to it, right? That says, okay, we have 36% stake. We don't have direct control. We can't vote to, with 36%, that's not a majority. So we can't vote to steer the ship in whatever direction we want, but we do have a pretty big finger on the scale, and we gave you 56 million. We'd like you to take a percentage of that and put it towards this new project. Go bigger, go better, and earn us something. If you do, we got something even better for you. So that meant that we developed Darktide. We started to develop Darktide, and that happened pretty shortly after Vermintide 2 is released, right? They, of course, did have some existing commitments to Vermintide 2, which was delivering the consoles, getting those to, and getting the game like kind of ironed out of most bugs. But once that was delivered, there's a significant like downturn in the amount of updates that Vermintide 2 got. And that is because they were developing Darktide. This is going to be their next big game. So they were probably, sort of voluntold to hop over there and get working on that Darktide game, because that's going to be the next really big thing. That's going to earn a lot of money for everybody involved. And the reason I see this is probably in 2019 is not only did Tencent acquire them, and this is probably when they got that initial seed money to start here, but also they were intending to release in 2021, and there's no fucking way they were doing that if they started any later. So yeah, this is probably the latest they could have started to release in 2021. However, that did get delayed because of COVID. Now, just prior well, actually, this is like in January 2021 or so, they acquired a majority stake. Tencent acquired a majority stake in Fat Shark. Unclear what exactly the percentage ownership is, but that cost them a cool $260 million to purchase the majority stake. So at this point, right, this isn't just going to be 5 times this stake, because that would be over 100%, but they have proven, like, they acquired in back here for 56 million. They're like, okay, Vermintide 2 doing pretty good, and then it continued to sell after the time they acquired it. It continued to sell like another 1 million copies, right? So they were having success here, and they were probably looking at what they were producing with Darktide and being like, all right, this is gonna sell a lot. They upped their investment because they wanted to have that majority stake so that they could take whatever they needed off the back end. And then Darktide released in 2022, and that sold, as of current date, 4 million total units on Steam, in the first month alone, it made 60 million US dollars, right? So that is a really, really big windfall. And then consoles double this probably, right? Like double the 8 million or so total units sold. That is a ton of money, right? As I said earlier, about $100 million have been made in Steam revenue, so double that, right? And that's not net, that's gross, but it's still a ton. And then in 2023, we had an unannounced Fat Shark project, Project X, was posted, and they're hiring for this. And this is supposedly an Unreal 5 engine game. They're mothballing the Stingray engine because it's just a buggy mess at this point. And yeah, they are going over to this new project. Now, I want to point something out, which is that they have a trend. When they shoot out a game, they very quickly start work on another game. Now, it makes sense here because they went from Vermintide 1 to Vermintide 2. Vermintide 1 bare bones, Vermintide 2 gets to flesh it out. They got a lot of money. Then Tencent acquires them. Right after Tencent acquired them for that initial, like a little bit of a stake, they began work on Darktide. And then, as soon as Tencent acquired the majority stake, they also, right in here somewhere, I didn't put on there, but Chaos Waste came out. Right? They hired a whole nother company to contract work to produce Chaos Waste. And yeah, like that's pretty cool too. Like, so all that stuff happened as a result of this extra influx of money. And so once Darktide releases, and once you sort out the existing requirements of, okay, we have to have a console release, etc., they were very likely told, okay, well, now we have the majority stake. We want all your guys, like as much as you can put onto the unannounced Fat Shark project. Now, as of 2024, I have some of their employees on record saying that the largest team was still the Darktide team in 2024. But remember, in 2024, we had not yet had the PS5 release. So my theory here is that after the PS5 release, that is probably no longer true. I think that they had that large team there to get the PS5 release out, to get Havoc done, all that stuff, to get the game. Remember, 2024 also had the crafting overhaul. So getting all that stuff sorted in 2024, and then 2025 was the first year where this new project was the big thing. And Darktide was the second fiddle to that. And that is also backed up by 2023, the class overhaul drop. This is probably also a pretty defining thing in the Tide timeline. In 2023, we had patch 13 for Darktide, which caused that class overhaul to happen, where we had the new actual talent trees rather than just like selecting 6 talents just like in Vermintide 2. And with that, we had the combat director, the lead combat designer. He left, as well as I think a good amount of his team. Now, this is normal. Like, this happens, right? When people have been working with the company for a while, when they deliver their goal, they then step out, because you don't want to leave mid-project. That's considered what they call in the industry a dick move. So you leave at the end of the project when you have delivered what you were expected to deliver. And it looked amicable by everything I read about him, from everything that he said about the issue, about leaving. It seems amicable. It just seems like he had been working there, started as contract work in 2015, and then, ran into 8 years of full-time work, ended up leading a 20-man team. And yeah, that was a pretty big project to get this thing. And so I think he, my work here is done. There we go. So with him leaving, that's probably why a lot of their hitboxes and stuff with combat in the game is kind of jank. Why we haven't received a whole lot of new enemies and stuff like that. So that's a lot of talent. That's a lot of talent out the door. And if you're going to be a little bit of a conspiracy theorist about it, you might also think that, hey, this was the opportunity he was given, right? They had just, by the way, the unannounced Fat Shark project was listed on hiring 2 months prior to this happening and him leaving. So one might think that they were like, okay, well, we're wrapping up on Darktide. The Tencent wants us to get this thing into a working state, and then by the end, get the PS5 release out, and then we're gonna move on to Project X. And he's probably like, nah, I'm good, right? Thanks guys. And that's your out, that's your opportunity. That could potentially be the case. So yeah, then somewhere in here we had that PS5 release, and then here in 2025 we had a really, really big windfall with Arbites, right? Arbites generated the largest influx of players and therefore revenue since launch. We had a cap of 44,000 concurrents, which is massive for a game like Darktide, which has only ever had a 115,000 concurrent on Steam. So yeah, that was a really, really big thing. And that has very much decided the future trajectory for Darktide, because, you know, when you earn a lot of money like that, you're going to want to do it again. And then here we are in 2026, where it seems like we are sticking with this pattern of a new class every 6 months. Now, beyond this, question mark, question mark, question mark down here is, when will this unannounced Fat Shark project come up? I am conspiratorial that it will happen this year, that it will be announced at some point this year. It might be like at an Xbox Expo or something, or it might be at Skulls, but I am very inclined to think that it is this year that it will be revealed what it is, because it has been, 3 years since they started hiring for this project, and we can very notably feel the siphoning off of core talent of development on Darktide for something else, and it has to be this, because it's not going to Vermintide. I know, like, Darktide people and Vermintide people love to fight, and it's like, oh, Vermintide got 4 maps last year, that's why we didn't get any. Nah, it's because all your map creators are probably making, some for the new game, and the Vermintide people are just like, they're just there. So that's sort of what I think is going on. Now let's explore just a little bit more. Let's explain like the profit breakdown. This is the ultimate thing that's going on here, right? This is all the money that goes around. So Darktide produces money. Microtransaction money goes to Tencent, a portion of it at least. All the sales of Darktide go to Fat Shark. Fat Shark pays a certain amount of money, who knows how much, but they pay a certain amount of money to Games Workshop, who gives them the IP rights to continue having this thing above their name. And then Fat Shark has this relationship with Tencent, where Tencent gives them big lumps of seed money to make new games, and then Fat Shark gives them a percentage of the profits back. And that might be an agreement that only exists for, like, hey, the first X months of the sales, we want this percentage, or you must make this amount of sales and then this rate. Who knows? It can be very, very complicated, the relationships that parent companies have with their subsidiaries. But this is the thing I really wanted to kind of stress is, this is a very professionally done graph, by the way. I found this, some statistician did it. But like, this is the Darktide revenues over time, right? So this is launch back here. Massive revenues at launch. This is where you earn the bulk of all the money that Darktide has ever made, is on that launch when millions of people pick this thing up. Because 1 million people got it in the first month. They made $60 million in the first month, right? So almost all of the money they've earned is up here. And then it trickled way, way, way down, and right here it hits a little bump. Guess what that is? That's Arbites, right? So Arbites is a big bump in terms of, like, the overall revenue. And then this is Hive Scum, probably. I don't know, Hive Scum might have been about the same. Who knows? It didn't have as many concurrent players, but who knows how many people bought it as compared to Arbites? Probably less. But this is what I'm thinking, is that if you're Tencent in this situation, where do you want to be invested, right? You don't want to be taking from this. This is the baseline. This baseline, like, earnings from, like, microtransactions and stuff. You don't want to siphon too much off of that, because that's what keeps the lights on. But you want to be there when this happens. You are there for this. So, and this to a lesser extent, right? So why is Tencent so, like, focused on, or why is Fat Shark right now so focused on developing their next game? Why is Fat Shark so focused on every 6 months we're going to have a new class? Well, because of this. Because when you make a new game, you make $60 million. You make a fuck ton of money right away. And when you put a new class out, it makes a big chunk of change too. And this coordinates and like very much agrees with Tencent's motives, because Tencent gets a percentage of the earnings. They want these big windfalls. They give you the money so you can hit this, not for this. They want this, and they want this, and they want this. So when we look at Darktide's priorities, when we look at what I believe the game director said about this, the one thing that they have been 100% firm on, that like at the start of the year they were saying we're almost done with the new class. It's like they are so far ahead with their homework with these new classes, because I guarantee they have been greenlit to make X number of classes, one every 6 months for the next 3 years or whatever, because those are revenue earners, because those actually turn a profit. And they have not been greenlit on making maps or anything unless they're going to sell them to us, which I would pay for maps. So this is the ultimate question, the thing I made this video for, which is to explain, why do we keep getting random game modes? Why are they saying Awesome. Yes, we'll give you a class every 6 months, but they won't give us any other weapons. They won't make new maps, right? Why are they so averse to this stuff as compared to like expeditions or whatever the hell that is, right? And that really just comes down to what the IP holder and what the parent company want, right? So when we're concerning ourselves with, okay, what about new maps and weapons? Should we add those to the game? Should we spend dev time and money to make these? Well, Tencent says no, because Tencent wants profits. They want to generate new profits. They want to draw new eyes, new investors, new players, and adding new maps to the game, while it's great for existing players, and adding new marks and revamping old weapons and stuff like that, reworking stuff, that doesn't generate any new profit. It brings back existing players and nothing more, right? That's not going to pop any headlines. From the other perspective here is, what's Games Workshop got to say about this? And Games Workshop is going to be your like negative incentive to do this, because Games Workshop is going to be all over you when you're making weapons. Imagine they have by the way, they have a weekly meeting with Games Workshop to discuss and like look at their, drafts of like, oh, we're thinking about adding this, and they go no, and they go back and forth a million times with notes, and that's got to be a huge pain. Imagine if you were drawing 4 weapons, and how many meetings, how many hours and hours and hours of meetings you'd have to get those 40k weapons to be realized the right way. It would be interminable. So there's probably a pretty strong negative incentive to make stuff like this, because you're going to be nitpicked. You're going to be absolutely like, completely crawled over by Games Workshop getting this all right. And Tencent is also not going to foot a whole lot of a bill. They're not really enthused about you making this stuff. So then we've also got the option of new classes. Tencent is 100% on board with new classes, and you can tell because Fat Shark's 100% on board with new classes, because they want this right here. They like this, and they like this, because these little bumps, that's some juicy revenue right there. They get a chunk of that. So they like that because that looks good for investors. That looks good for like just bottom line, like that's revenue. So yeah, this is because new classes are revenue generators. 100%, we are going to make those, and that's why you're seeing this commitment from Fat Shark. Every 6 months, we will have a new class. That's why they are so far ahead. They already have their homework done. Like they were telling us in January, the new class is almost done, which is crazy. So like they are so far ahead of this because they have been told, probably from like, right after RB's launch, hell yeah, that was a good launch. That was a good chunk. Keep doing that. Do that more. Can you do that more? Yeah, keep doing that. And so there you go. When they are given the green light to go, they go, but they are not given the green light on this sort of stuff. And Games Workshop also has a vested interest in new classes, right? Because they want it to align with their content. They want to coordinate when all of their IP holders release content that has to do with X, because then they will make certain that they made a bunch of plastic minifigures of X. So you notice how coincidentally Owlcat had an Arbides class added to its game, and at the same time that Darktide did. Coincidence? I think not, right? And then I heard from Fat Shark that they didn't know that Owlcat was adding Arbides. They just went with it because it was the easiest thing for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Games Workshop wasn't like whispering in their ear, going like, ooh, actually, I think Arbides would be like a really good choice for a first class because it's like simple and stuff. And they go run over to Owlcat and it's like, it would be so cool to have in your game right now? Arbides, yeah. And then just coincidentally, like the front page of their shop is like Arbides novels. I think they actually did come up with a couple of Arbides novels like right after, and then like, minifigs. Oh, what do you know? Everyone's talking about Arbides right now. How did that happen? It's splattered, it's plastered all over Warhammer skulls, Arbides, yeah. So they're gonna do that because they're able to say, hey, we won't give you this IP right now. We don't want you to work on this right now. Okay, now you can work on it. So if we're seeing that there are other IP holders who are releasing AdMech at Skulls, what's the odds that Darktide is going to be talking about AdMech at Skulls, because there's going to be an AdMech push this year. So then we also have the new game mode. Why the hell are we getting these random new game modes? Why did we get an extraction shooter in Darktide? Why did we get a roguelike in Vermintide and then followed up on Darktide? Well, it looks good for investors, right? It looks good when you can point to your investors or your holdings. Like Tencent, Think about like your most boomer uncle who does investing, and he reads the investment papers, and he's looking for like companies who are on the up and up, and he wants to see which ones will, to look into. They have these like statements they put out for their quarterly earnings or quarterly reports of like what they did. And when you have a quarterly report, if you think about like what Darktide does every quarter, right? The reason there's updates every quarter is to have like one big thing for every quarter, so you can like show that you're making progress. And you don't want to have a 6-month period where you do nothing, because that looks bad, right? So every quarter there's an update for Darktide. You notice that? And last year, one of these updates was literally a rework for Ogren, and that was it. Except it had this new game mode called Mortis Trials. And in fall, the update was literally just a rework for 3 classes and 2 new marks on existing weapons. But it also had a new map and a new couple archetypes for that game mode. It's not that anybody is like playing that game mode and demanding content from Mortis Trials. What it is because this stuff, new maps and weapons, that doesn't look like anything to investors, right? If you're going to tell investors that, oh, our existing classes got 2 new marks of a bolt pistol, whatever, and we overhauled some of the talent trees, they don't fucking care. What they care is, oh, roguelikes, those are really big right now. That's a really big trend in gaming. Let's add one of those. Oh, they added one of those to Vermintide 2. That's successful. Let's add one of those to Darktide. Oh, extraction shooters, those are really big right now. Let's get one of those exists in Darktide now. Wow, Helldivers was a massive success, and it's an extraction shooter, and now Darktide has it. That must mean Darktide is a big success. The people that are looking at this are so detached from the state of the game, they don't care that nobody's actually going to play this. It doesn't actually matter that like no one genuinely has interest in this. What matters is that it generates buzz. It generates like, eyes on the topic that like, oh, Darktide is able to add a whole new game mode. It must be doing really well for itself. And that's just sort of why we have this mismatch between what us as players want and what the actual powers that be want. We're going to continue to get new cosmetics and stuff. Oh, and by the way, Games Workshop doesn't really care about new game modes, right? They're probably like, oh, if it takes place on a Psyker's brain, yes, do whatever, right? You can literally just make it up. It can be fantastical for all you care, which is probably really nice to have less hands-on for that process. But also, when I'm talking about this, I should also mention the cosmetic shop. The cosmetic shop is all these guys. It's literally this, the interplay between these 2 companies is 100% the cosmetic shop. So first of all, the cosmetic shop is the structure of it. The time that it takes to rotate, the number of things that are on each shop, the number of things that can be on sale in each shop, and the pricing is set by Tencent. They are the ones who do all that. The items that can go in the shop, and of course all cosmetics in the game, are through Games Workshop. They have to approve all of these cosmetic looks. So when you ask the question of why don't we get new Arbites cosmetics, but we continue to get rotations for everything else in the game, well, Arbites cosmetics were probably agreed upon ahead of time by Games Workshop, and Games Workshop at this point is like, okay, you guys are such small fries, and adding an additional couple coats for the Arbites would generate literally like $10,000 in revenue, which we would get like 10% of or whatever, that they literally won't even get out of bed for that sort of money. You have to remember that Tencent and Games Workshop are so much larger than Fat Shark as companies that they just don't really care about what Fat Shark wants most of the time. So like, yeah, you can go and say, please, sir, can I have some Arbites cosmetics? And they'll say, fuck off, peasant. Like, I don't have time for you. Can't you see I'm with Space Marine 2 right now? We're trying to make a thing happen here. And you can see the difference in how Darktide is treated versus Space Marine 2, who has now been folded into the 500 worlds. Like, they're having novels written, and they're going to have, probably the Amazon show is going to be written about like Titus. Like, it's just all about Space Marine 2, and why is that? Well, it's because Space Marine 2 generated a ton of revenue. They are a really big fish. They are getting a ton of attention and focus from Games Workshop, and probably a lot more leeway and permission to do stuff because they're big revenue generators. Because Darktide doesn't generate that much revenue right now, and they kind of like, are past their expiry date in terms of like what's fresh and new. Games Workshop probably isn't interested outside of the initial deal of, okay, we're going to give you permission to make these many things for RBDs, and then we're just going to go hands off because we just don't want to have any more meetings about that, right? We cannot be having 10 meetings about the cosmetics for RBDs and Hive Scum in order to make like $6,000 for us, right? It's just not worth it for them. So that's what's going on there. So then the final question, the final thing that people probably want to talk about is, so what's Fat Shark's next game? I mentioned earlier that Fat Shark has to be making another game. They've already said they're making another game. I believe that most of the people in their studios now are working on this game, and that's why Darktide is on a skeleton crew. It's why there's very little that gets done in any given quarter, and that's because everybody's over there. So in terms of what Fat Shark's next game is going to be, it is, first of all, not Vermintide 3. They've already confirmed it's not Vermintide 3. Also, that would be suicide. Fat Shark has access to the 40k IP. They have not lost that IP, so they would be stupid to not play to 40k, right? 40k is so much larger than fantasy, and 40k, you know, it's kind of unfortunately, it's kind of how they're going to be from now on. They are going to be a 40k studio. If they ever attempt to go away from 40k and create their game, I'm certain it would be a great game under their creative direction. You know, without those holdings, I'm certain it'll be they could do a cool Tide game for something else. I'd probably play it, but it will be 1/15th as popular as Darktide is because the 40k is the big draw there, right? It gets to have that much more publicity because it's 40k, so it has to be something in the 40k universe. I also would expect it to chase trends. I would expect it to maybe even potentially not even be a Tide game. Maybe they've decided that 4-player co-op games like this are cool, but what if it's a 4-player co-op extraction shooter like Arc Raiders or something? Like, we're chasing trends, but remember that this game's probably started development back in 2023, so think about trends at that time. I don't really remember, but like, you know, whatever was big back then, imagine that some of that is going to make its way into the game, or it'll just be another Tide game because they're pretty good at Tide games. And then microtransactions, hell yeah, there's of course going to be cosmetics and microtransactions. It's 2026, baby. What do you expect? I would also anticipate potentially moving up to a bigger scale of a project with a bigger IP, meaning like, okay, you know, we've done pseudo guardsmen on this planet, right? Like rejects, right? That's the pretty low, small fish to fry in the 40k universe. It's a pretty small scale conflict. If they're going to handle something bigger and grander that's closer to a core like IP thing, like a big, valuable, juicy 40k IP thing, like orcs, like a lot of people are like saying like Green Tide or something like that, you know, you could do orcs, you could do, I don't know, I'm not a really big 40k guy, but there's a ton of things that you could do out there, right, that are bigger than just some random duders who aren't even Imperial Guard on some planet you made up, right? You could do something much more core to the 40k property and probably get a lot more attention for doing it. And as far as when it'll release, maybe 2027. I think that'll be probably, we will 100% see a reveal of this game before 2027 is over. I'll give it that. Like, there's no fucking way that we just sit with Darktide for that amount of time. So I would expect to see a release this year, honestly, or a reveal this year, honestly, and then next year release. Optimistic, but that's just me. So there you go, guys. Hopefully a fun little video, a little discussion, a little yap tide for you. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Mr. Yell. Bye-bye.